I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Rocketarium SA-2 Guideline model rocket. This is a scale model of a Soviet-era ground-to-air missile. We'll go ahead and open this up here. Okay, and as usual, we want to check and make sure that everything is here. Okay, so inside this package, we've got 4 large balsa fins, right, and then another set of 4 smaller balsa fins, and then these are little 3D printed canard fins. These may not be in the same package as the bigger fins are. Okay, they may be packaged somewhere else. Alright, we have some nose weight here, 60 grams worth of plasticine clay. Okay, we've got 2 launch lugs and a shock cord, some water slide decals, 2 body tubes, one at 12.5 inches and one at 6 inches. Alright, an ejection baffle kit. Okay, and then another kit that contains the 24mm motor mount. And this is a little bit different than the standard ones that you can buy from Rocketarium individually. Okay, we have a nose cone that has been pre-drilled for 4 holes, and the canard fins here will eventually fit into that, like that. Okay, a large tail cone, and this is a little bit unusual in that the tail cone tapers outward rather than inward. And then finally we have a blue plastic parachute. Okay, so make a quick check here of our list, and it looks like we have everything. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back away. Alright, and I'll finish putting this away, clearing this off, and we will get started in just a moment. So our first task is to assemble the motor mount. And so I'm going to go ahead here and just cut open the parts bag. You'll also need the tail cone for this step. Okay, and this yellow piece here is a spacer. It's not actually structurally part of the rocket. And this orange piece is also a spacer, but this one's not used in construction. This is if you're going to fly on a D or a C size 24mm motor rather than E. And so I'm just going to set that aside for now. Alright, and according to our instructions here, we need to apply a bead of glue about 3/4 of an inch down the forward end of our motor mount here. So I'm just going to stick that around. Okay, nice bead of glue there. And we may even have to, I'm going to go ahead and spread that out a little and make sure it gets down a little bit farther. Because now what we're going to do is take the engine block ring, put that in, the aft end of the motor mount tube, and then this spacer is going to go inside, and I'm simply going to press that down. Okay, and you can see how the motor mount, or the engine block, was pressed up into the glue in the motor mount, and then immediately take this back out as we don't want to glue it on the inside. Okay, and then we just want to let that dry for just a few minutes, and then we'll come back and continue with the assembly. A few minutes have passed now, and that'll be just long enough for the glue to set up enough that this engine block won't move. And so we'll go ahead and go on to the next part, where now we need to measure 95mm from the aft end of the tube. So it'd be 9.5 centimeters. Okay, and I'm just going to make a mark right here. And if everything is fitting the way it should, that should be right at the edge of my engine block. And now I'm just going to cut a small slit here. And looking inside, okay, it's a little bit low on the engine block. We can come up a little higher there. There we go. Okay, and that slit only needs to be about 3 millimeters wide or so, just enough to allow the top of the engine clip to fit in there, just like that. Okay, now next we're going to make another mark at 25 millimeters or 2.5 centimeters, again from the aft end, and that'll be right here. Okay, and then this gray-black sleeve will fit over that, and it's going to come right to that mark. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is back that off a bit, and go ahead and put some glue on here. Okay, you don't need a large amount, you just want it uniform around. Okay, and I'm just going to slide this right up to that mark, and then I'll just spread the excess glue into a semi-fillet here. This really isn't a structural piece, it's just keeping the engine clip from moving around too much. So you don't need to worry too much about putting really strong fillets on there. Alright, now we have this ring here. And one side of it is marked down. Okay, now I'm going to put this together dry fitting first. So the engine mount is going to go down inside of the tail cone here, and we've got a notch that's already cut there for the engine clip. So I'm just going to fit this down inside. Okay, so it should fit right up against the bottom of the tail cone. And then our engine clip should be able to move freely in there. And then this ring, it's got a little bit of a notch in it. That's going to go over the engine clip. And make sure you put it this side down, facing downward. Okay, and then that's going to slide right into the top here of the tail cone assembly. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and take that back out. Okay, and first of all, I'm going to glue here. And you can use a fair amount of glue on this one, as we want it to fill up the channels that are inside there. And also you want to have some tissue or something handy so that you'll be able to wipe off the excess right away. Alright, so I've got a piece of tissue ready here. Okay, I'm going to take that back off. Okay, and now we're going to do this again. Now I'm going to get some glue in there. Alright, that's why I have this tissue. So now I've got a bunch of excess glue there, and I don't want that. So here I'm just going to take that out with my finger, first of all. Okay. I will need more than one tissue here. Alright, I'm also going to wipe the excess off of the clip. Okay, now if you get a little bit between the plastic there, like that's trying to do, once it dries it will break back off because it won't hold the steel very well. Okay, get as much off as you can, and then especially get the stuff off from inside the tube as much as possible. Okay, so that's still in place there. Now we don't want to wait a long time for this, so we're now going to put some more glue right around that top edge. Pretty generous there, so the glue gets into all the little nooks and crannies. Alright, and then we want some more around the engine mount, right at the same level. You can do it a little bit higher if you need to. because our ring is going to come down and push down inside of there. Alright, and so now we're going to take the centering ring for the top, make sure it has the down in the down position. Alright, and now I'm just going to push this all together, making sure it's flush. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hold this for about 60 seconds to make sure it's grabbing, and then we can go through at the same time if you like and just kind of wipe off the excess glue there. Now around this part we can go ahead and put in a fillet. Because this is structural. Okay, like that. And I'm going to go ahead and continue holding this for another 30 seconds or so. And then I'm just going to set this aside and let it fully dry. While the glue on the engine mount is drying, we can proceed to the next step of marking the airframe. And so one thing we'll need to do is come back here and cut out this fin marking guide. Alright, and they put it all the way in the back so there's nothing there that we might cut into. But if you don't want to cut up your instructions, you can certainly just go through and photocopy this. Okay, now you may notice here it does not specify a launch lug line, and that's because there isn't one. Instead, the launch lug is going to be applied to the fins themselves. Okay, so we're just going to wrap this around one end of the rocket here. All right, and this is on the larger of the two tubes. And here I'm going to take a piece of masking tape, have it ready. Alright, so I'm just going to line up the tick marks there. Alright, and then I'm going to tape this, and I like to extend the tape over onto the body tube so that the guide does not move. I'm going to do that over here on both sides. Okay, and now I'm simply going to take a pencil here and make a little tick mark at each arrow. Alright, and then once you have all those on, go ahead and remove your masking tape. Okay, and then we're going to draw a line all the way up the length of the tube here. Even though the fins may not go all the way up, it makes aligning the fins a lot easier. Traditionally, you can use a door frame for this. You can also use a piece of angle metal, or you can use something like this, which is SD's fin marking guide. I'm especially a fan of this thing. It's one of the best rocketry investments I ever made, because it's just a whole bunch of straight edges. Right, so I'm just going to mark this all the way up. Okay, now we can set this aside again. And then we're going to next do the baffle assembly. Okay, the baffle assembly comes with its own instructions, and Rocketarium also sells these for use in other rockets. And I've got to admit, after building several of Rocketarium's kits, I've become a big proponent of baffles. They actually do a much better job of protecting the parachute than wadding or even dog barf does. I'd say the only thing that comes close would be a reusable Nomex wadding, which doesn't always fit in smaller rockets. So these are actually a really nice investment, even if you're not building a Rocketarium kit. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is simply add a little bit of glue to the hole. All right, and then I'm just going to screw this in. So the glue's coming out the back side too, that's good. Okay, I'm going to screw this in just till I get to the top of the threads on that side. And then over on this side, I'm just going to smooth that glue in. You can even add a little bit more. Alright, so that when that dries, that screw eye is not going to go anywhere. Alright, so on one end of the baffle coupler, we're going to put in a thick bead of glue right on the inside edge. Okay, and the baffle plate without the screw eye then is going to fit into this. Okay, and the instructions often show this being flush with the edge. I like to leave just a little bit of an edge there. Okay, so down inside here, you can just take your little finger and smooth the glue out into a fillet. You do want this to be fairly strong because it's going to be taking the full pressure of the ejection charge. Okay, and then on this other side, I can go ahead and fillet this as well. All right, and if you're getting glue smeared all over the place like I am, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, just keep it off the outside of the coupler. Like that. Okay, and then we're going to do a similar thing on the other end, except we're going to take our bead of glue and kind of smooth it out some more, making it wider. My glue bottle's being a little bit messy today. All right, but we actually want to spread this down a little bit more. Okay, and then the way this works is you stick this in kind of sideways and then bring it up like that and then pull it forward. And again, I like to leave a little bit of a gap there so that the glue has a place to pile up a little bit. Okay, just bring that a little forward. All right, since we can't reach down inside now, that's why we put that wider band of glue on, so that as we move this around, it will form an interior fillet as well. Okay, now if you've got a little tiny amount of glue like I've got there, it'll just dry and it won't cause a problem. You don't want glue to be filling in a large proportion of the holes though. Okay, so this is done and we can let this dry as well. Now according to the instructions, the next step is to transfer the plasticine clay into the nose cone here. Now this is a very important step and you cannot skip it or your rocket is going to be unstable. However, I am going to delay this because something I found that these kits that have canard fins that stick into the nose cone here, the nose weight can sometimes come up above the level of the holes and it gets into the holes there as you tamp it down. And this makes it harder for the glue to stick the canard fins onto the nose cone. So I'm going to put my canards on first in a later step, and then toward the end of the assembly I will go ahead and add the nose weight here. But again, I can't stress enough, you cannot fly this rocket without that nose weight in place. Next we're going to glue the motor mount and tail cone assembly into the body tube. Now here you can see my glue is not completely dry yet, but it is skinned over and it's grabbed onto everything, so it shouldn't be any problem here. Although if you're really worried about it, just let this dry completely before going on. And here we're going to do the glue in two parts here. So usually we just take something like this and we'd glue the inside of the tube, stick it in. But we're also going to put some glue here on these channels to help hold in place. Now what this is going to mean is we're probably going to have some glue squeezing out of the body tube onto the tail cone. And so again, you'll want to have some tissues ready to clean off that excess glue right away. All right, so I'm just filling up all the channels there and leaving a little bit of excess on the surface. Okay, and I'm just going to set that there for a moment. And I'm going to take all this excess glue and stick it up inside the tube. Alright, now if you don't have enough excess glue in your fingers, then go ahead and add some more here. Alright, but do try to avoid big blobs. Go ahead and smear that around there. I'm just going to stand that there for a moment while I wipe off my fingers. Okay, and then one last thing to consider. Personally, I like to have my engine clip on the same side of the rocket as the launch lug. And so in this case, since the launch lug is going to be attached to one of the fins, I'm just going to make sure and align this with one of the fin lines. So here I'm just going to put this in and give it a twisting motion here. Do this fairly quickly so the glue does not bind and lock on you. Okay, so it should look like that. And now I'm just going to smear this around. Alright, and if you do this just right, you should get a fairly smooth transition between the tail cone and the body tube. Okay, and so now we will let that dry for a little while and come back and join the tubes together. For this next part, you're going to need the completed baffle assembly and then the shorter tube here, as well as the shock cord. Alright, so first thing we need to do is measure for the center point on this, which is going to be at 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. So just make yourself a little line right here. Okay, and the side without the eyelet is going to go into the main body tube. And so here again, I'm going to put in a bead of glue. Now this one we don't want dripping. We want a nice even film of glue around this. Okay, and now we're just going to simply put this in and twist it back and forth until we get to that mark, and then let that dry for a few minutes. Alright, so now take the shock cord, either the rubber one or if you put Kevlar on. You're going to attach it in the same way. So just apply a couple of half hitches or a double knot to the screw eye here. Alright, and just pull it from several directions, including both at once, to make sure that knot is good and tied down. Now if you have a lot of excess material here, go ahead and cut that off. Basically, if this is extending out beyond the coupler, go ahead and cut that back. But don't cut it all the way back to the knot. Once you have your knot as tight and the right size that you want it, if you're doing this with the rubber, apply a little drop of white or wood glue to the knot. and work that in, and this will just help keep the knot from coming untied. If you're doing this with Kevlar, put a drop of regular super glue on it and then just let it dry. Okay. Now, go ahead and pass that through the smaller of the body tubes. Just like that. And now we're going to apply some glue to the inside here, which is typical. It's actually going to be a little bit less messy though to apply the glue to the coupler. So you can do it either way, and if you see my other videos, I usually put it in the tube, but I'm going to do it this way this time. In part because if you do it this way, it's going to squeeze some excess glue out along the coupling line. And the advantage to that is that you can smooth it into the seam and then get a smoother transition there. Okay, the disadvantage is you're going to have a lot of excess glue to wipe off. All right, go ahead and just move that down. All right, and again here I'm going to go ahead and just wipe this around. Do this fairly quickly if you're using a quick bonding wood glue. Okay, and I'm just going to do this again. Get the rest of that off, but still trying to leave some in the seam itself. Okay, and then come back up here and just pull this taut against the edge so that it does not hang down into any excess glue. And then you can put the whole thing off to one side and let it dry. While the body tube is drying, we can go ahead and start on the fins. And if you want the true scale model type of appearance here, the leading and trailing edges are going to be tapered to points. So they're going to have knife edges right along here and also along here. And so to measure those, we'll go ahead and do 3/8 of an inch here as measured along the tip edge. Okay, so we're going to have 3/8 right there. All right, and then we'll do the same thing down here. And this pencil in a line there. You don't need to make that very dark or deep. So right there, and then along this edge. Right here. That. Okay, and then we'll flip this over and do the same thing on the opposite side. And then I'm going to do it to the other 3 main fins as well. But I'm going to do all this part off camera. Now I noticed as I was moving to the other side of the fin that that first measurement I had of the trailing edge was off a little bit. So this is the new line here at truly 3/8 of an inch. Now that I've marked all the fins, I'm going to start sanding the taper into these. And I'm going to start with some 100 grit sandpaper to do the major shaping, and then move to 150 grit to do the final sanding. Once we have the shape here, I'll also then sand the faces of these smooth, and then eventually we'll put some sanding sealer on there. So here I'm starting by just taking off the corner edges, And then on the root edge here, I'm just going to give it a few strokes of the sandpaper to get through the soot there and have a better gluing area. But I want to keep that flat and perpendicular. The same out here on the very tip. Okay, and most of this will get shaped as we shape the leading and trailing edges. Okay, and then I'll frequently come back and make sure that in cross section everything is looking even. Okay, and then back in here, just start sanding this inward. And again, I'm just doing the corners here to start with. Okay. Now on the trailing edge, this is going to have a much longer taper than the leading edge will, but we're still going to make these knife edges rather than having it rounded here and tapered back here. If you don't want the full scale effect, then you can just round off the leading edge and leave the trailing edge square. The advantage to doing that is it will give you a stronger fin edge. Having the knife edges here means it's easier to chip the fins, especially on the very edges. But I'm going to go ahead and do this in the full scale effect. So I'm going to just go back to sanding here. Alright, now this job is going to take a while, in part because these fins are really thick. And so I'm going to continue my sanding off camera here because it's almost like watching golf. It's not very exciting. And when I come back, I'll put the finishing touches on here and here so you can see how they come out. And then I'll do the rest of the fins offline as well. So at this point I have most of the fin shaped using the 100 grit sandpaper, and I've brought it just so I'm touching, partially erasing my lines here. Okay, and so now I'm going to take some 150 grit sandpaper and just kind of give some finishing sanding there. Okay, and I check the cross section. That's got a nice smooth edge. Okay, and so you can see a nice cross section there, pretty even. And now I'm just going to go ahead and do the surface here. Okay, so that fin is finished and ready to go. Here I have the main fins done, and you can see here they're nicely tapered in cross section there. And then I've also sanded the faces there, so all those are done. Okay, and while we're sanding, our next task then is to sand the aft fins. And these will be pretty much like the main fins, except that they don't have the long taper to them. These will just do a shorter, more steep taper on the leading and trailing edges. Okay, but otherwise, these are going to be sanded just the same. And so again, I'm going to briefly sand the root edge here to get rid of most of that soot. Okay, same thing with the tip edge, like that. Okay, and then just like we did with the big fins, I'm going to start by just sanding off the corners. Okay, and on these ones, that's about all I have to do. So I'm just going to keep sanding till the two angles meet there. Pretty close there. If you want, you can go ahead and keep that as close to a knife edge as you can. Okay, and then the same thing back here. This may be easier to do this way. Alright, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the other three fins, and just like we did with the bigger ones, also just sand the faces here to prepare them for sanding sealer. Alright, so I'm going to do the other three fins off camera and then we'll come back. Now that the fins are sanded, we need to mark the body tube. And this is going to be a little bit difficult because of the tail cone here is not parallel with the rest of the body tube, but the measurements here are all being done from the aft end of the tail cone. So what I did was measure the actual length of the tail cone, not the slope, and that gave me 2 5/8 inches. And then I subtracted that from the other dimensions here. So for the aft fin, it's supposed to be 3.5 inches from the base of the tail cone, which means it's 7/8 of an inch from the aft end of the body tube. And then for the forward fins here, those are supposed to be 7.25 inches from the base of the tail cone, which means they are 4 7/8 inches from the aft end of the tube. So here we can now make some measurements. All right, so 7/8, and I've already pre-marked this one. I'll mark it back in there. And then 4 7/8 is going to be right here. Okay, so that when we put these in place, the aft fin will go like that, and the forward fin will be here. All right, so I'm going to mark the other 3 lines here off camera. Right, and I have all my marks made, and it's a good idea to go through and make sure they're all even. The first time through I found that I'd actually mismarked one of them. Might have even been the one I showed you guys here. But now all of these are at their appropriate places at 7/8 and 4 7/8 inches from the base of the tube. So I'm just going to set this aside for now. For the sanding sealer, I'm going to use a water-based polyurethane sanding sealer. Mine's made by Minwax. There are several different ones out there. They all work fairly well. And then we're going to need some straight pins, okay, like these. And what I'm going to do is put a pin about midway through the root edge here. I'm just going to push this in. You don't need to go very far, and make sure you don't get it in an angle where you push it through your finger. Okay, but this will allow me to handle the fin without having my fingers in the sanding sealer. And then also, I've got a piece of corrugated cardboard here. This is one I've made into a quick and dirty rocket holder. But mainly what I'm interested in is the corrugations, because these little holes, I can now put the straight pin in, and let that fin hang and dry while I go on to the next fin. Okay, so what I'm going to do here for this fin is I'm going to just take a cotton applicator. You can use a paintbrush as well, but this way I don't have to worry about cleaning out a paintbrush. Okay, and we're going to coat all of the sides and edges except for the root edge. And you can be pretty generous with this because it's going to soak into the grain. And that will fill in the dips and valleys and holes in the grain of the wood and ultimately give us a finer finish once the rocket is done. Okay. Typically I use a coat of this, let it dry for a few hours, and then sand it, and then I'll put another coat on and repeat that process. If you want to, you can even put a third or fourth coat on. I find that 2 is usually enough unless you just have really, really porous wood. So this isn't required. If you're one of those people who just likes to get a rocket built as quickly as possible and get it on the launch pad, you can skip this step. It just means you'll see some wood grain in your paint job. All right. And also if you get some on the root edge here, it's not a big deal. You just need to sand through that before you mount the fins because the sanding sealer will make the glue less adhesive. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this over here on my cardboard. I'm going to let that dry. And I'm going to do the same thing with the rest of the main fins as well as the aft fins off camera. The sanding sealer is drying, and while that is happening, we can come back to our body tube here. And what I'm going to do is just take some medium sandpaper here and roughen up where the fins are going to go. Now, you don't have to be exact about it, and you don't need to do this a lot. So I'm just going to come in here about like that. Okay, you don't necessarily, if you remove the line completely, you can redraw it back in. But if you just got it where you can still see a little bit of the line, that's probably enough. All right, and then come up here for the main fin, that's going to be longer. And if you want, you can take the fins and set them along here as a guide. Since my fins are currently all sticky with sanding sealer, I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm just going to do this all the way around. And what this does is make a rougher surface that will allow the glue to hold better. Alright, and that's all there is to it. Something else we can do while the sanding sealer is drying is to work on the nose cone a bit here. Now we still have the canard fins as well as the nose cone itself. And if you look at this closely, there's a seam on either side of this where the mold came together. Now, I'm not sure what they use. It feels like it's polypropylene. And if that's the case, paint will not want to stick to this very well. And so there's a couple of things that we can do. These are all optional. The first thing I'm going to do is sand this seam here to knock down the high points on both sides. And then I'm going to give the entire nose cone a light sanding. And that'll provide a better gripping surface for the primer and the paint to adhere to. what's left here are some small valleys, and you can either ignore those and just lightly sand the rest of this, or you can add some plastic model putty to this, which is what I'm going to do after I get this other seam done. Alright, so I've got the ridge on that one knocked down, and now I'm just going to lightly sand all the way around the nose cone. And now you can just take a bit of tissue or a rag with a little bit of water or alcohol and wipe this down. And then we will go ahead and do the putty. I've wiped off the dust from this now. And so here, now I don't know how well it's showing up in the video, but there's still a bit of a groove right here and one's right there. And the same thing on the other side. They're not really pronounced on this particular nose cone. What I'm going to do to fill those in is use this contour putty for plastic models. There are several brands of this out there. I'm using Testers, but I know you can find several different brands out in the hobby stores and online. This particular one is water soluble though, so it makes cleanup fairly easy. And what I'm going to do is just run this into a bead. Doesn't have to be very thick, but right along that seam. I'm going to try and keep it out of the hole there. Okay, and then just take a finger and smooth this in. And it's going to start drying right away, and it gets crumbly when it does so. So you want to do this fairly quickly. And up here at the tip, there are actually two grooves that kind of diverge from each other. Okay, so you just do a quick job of smoothing this on. Okay, I'm going to do the same on the other side here. And this side the groove's even smaller, so I don't need to use a whole lot of putty here. And once more, just go ahead and smooth that in. Alright, now you want this to be completely dry before you sand it. And that takes about 2 hours. And also be warned that when you do sand this putty, it clogs up sandpaper really badly. So you might want to have a spare sheet or two handy. So I'm going to let this dry. And while it's drying, now I'm going to check out the canard fins here. These, along with the tail cone, were 3D printed. And so you can see the texture left by the printer here. And even if you can't see it, you can feel it. Depending on your personal preferences, you can sand these and or use the plastic model putty to fill those little ridges in. I actually like them. I think it gives it a kind of a machine metal appearance to it. But if you need to remove any plastic flash or excess here, I recommend using one of these. This is a disposable nail file, also called an emery board. This allows you to get into some of the smaller nooks and crannies here. And here again, I'm not really trying to shape this a whole lot, just remove any excess flash material. Okay, now right on the tip of this one we've got some. I'm just going to kind of contour that. Get rid of most of it. There, kind of shape it into the rest of this fin. And then the other key thing to check here is with the nose cone, and I'm not going to do this on the parts I just puttied, But make sure it fits into the hole okay and that it's nice and flush against the surface. Alright, I'll check these other 3 off camera. At this point I have all the fins sanded, and so I did use 2 coats of sanding sealer. After the first coat I sanded it back down with 150 grit sandpaper, and then after the second coat with 220 grit sandpaper. So this has got a really nice smooth finish now. Same with the aft fins. And then on the nose cone I sanded off a lot of the excess putty with some 150 grit sandpaper, and then did the fine finish here with 220 as well. And actually it looks like I need to do just a little more right here. Alright, and so that looks good all the way around. So what I'm going to do now is just get a rag or some tissue here, wipe the dust off of everything, and then we'll be ready to start mounting the fins.